everybody. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have someone here today that's going to help you be super smart with your money. And if you're not that type of person, you're like, oh, I don't know if this is for me. It is, because Brandon is a great guy. He's got an amazing podcast. He has great stories to share with you around your money and how you can be better at taking care of your money and having your money work for you, all those good things that we want. And Brandon's here to talk about his podcast and his journey. Excited to have him here, Brandon. Welcome to the How to Podcast series.
Hey, thanks, David. I'm excited to share what I did wrong, maybe, along there. We've been podcasting for, let's see, how many years? Well, when did podcast start? 2016, 2015 almost.
Yeah, way back, right?
And no one knew what it was. And they're like, you're doing a podcast? What? What is that? No one's going to listen to that. And now everybody, that's all they do. And even my son, who's 6, is like, hey, can we put on a podcast? And so he's always learning through podcasting, radio show, I guess. I don't know.
Nice.
But he loves listening to podcasts.
Awesome. I love that. There's an app for kids called Kids Pod, I believe it is. And it's only for kids. There's only kids programming on it. There's no adult content. It's all gated. There's no commercials. It's all free. And it's like all geared to kids. Every episode, every podcast. It's really great. Had the creators of the app on my show. Super great. So if you have small kids and you're listening and you're afraid to kind of let them loose on Apple or Spotify or whatever, there's an app just for kids. So you should check it out.
I was talking to my son about his future and saying he's going to run our business one day. And I'm afraid to give him that because he already said, I want to be the content creator for Wealth Wisdom Financial. And I don't need another job yet, to get him going. I was like, oh, yeah, we should totally do that. But he wants to do content creation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. He's 6.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. He loves it. He's and even with our book, when we wrote the book, it was written towards him of if something happened to me, what would I give him? And that was the 5 Smooth Stones book that we have, but also our podcast and our, what we have our conversations on. He could learn who we are, even if we're beyond the grave,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's pretty powerful for us anyway. I want to help other people, but ultimately, it's really about him, for me anyway.
There's one person you could probably consider for your show if you were looking for a guest in the future. I had a student on. He's in grade school. He created a podcast called Cash Kid, and it's just him. He talks to kids about money and how to take care of your money. He is a super smart kid, and he loves talking all things money. So I was so impressed with this guy. He's so smart. He knows his stuff. He knows podcasting. And I just the future is so bright, Brandon. If we have kids like that picking up the mantle of podcasting when there's you and I, we're like, wow, if only I had this when I was that age, right?
Yeah, right. Well, and then, the other factor is knowing, if we had that when we were our age, we didn't even have podcasts or, I feel old, like I walked uphill both ways.
Of course.
To school, but really teaching our kids how to think. That's kind of what I do in our podcast, is all about thinking, not just consuming. And as a podcaster, we want to consume, and that's our world. That's part of our culture is consumer price index or whatever, all that stuff. But in the 80-20 rule of creation, the people that are creators usually make more money, the thinkers. And so consume, but also be a creator and be consistent in creating, I think that's what I want to teach my son and other kids, whether it's podcast, YouTube, whatever it's going to be in 30 years.
Right.
you know?
It's just going to keep changing and growing and morphing the whole time. And I think the definition of a podcast is pretty flexible. I think that there's a lot of people who are saying it's only one thing or another thing, but it's kind of whatever the audience says it is really what it is. And we just want to be where they are. That's kind of the overarching goal for me and my show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then some, I don't know, but like I remember when COVID hit, we were podcasting for years, and then people stopped listening to anything, right? They weren't podcasting went down in view listenership because people were at home. And so we pivoted. We then did YouTube and podcasting, and so being able to adapt and say, all right, what's happening? Like that was an extreme example, but that's what led us into recording video as well as audio.
Yeah. Good. I love it. So tell everybody about your show, kind of like what we can expect as a listener. I'd love to point people to what you're up to in your podcast.
Yeah, so a little bit about us is we used to be coffee shop owners. Um, really, we had a brick and mortar business, and then people would always ask us, "Hey, can I just pick your brain? Can I ask you questions?" And they would come into the coffee shop and ask lots of advice. They'd never buy coffee, which is really annoying. If you ask me for my, master's in business questions and then never even buy a cup of coffee, that was annoying. So we were like, hey, we know what we're doing. So we launched into, and we're activists. So our first ever podcast, we called it Business Activist Entrepreneur Podcast, which is a really long podcast name. But we were like, oh, you have to say what you do and all that. I think we were a little premature in what we were building. We didn't know ourselves as well, and so we had that one. We were doing um, talk about business and activism and entrepreneurship. Of course, that's in the title, right? Uh, and then we were like, hey, we then pivoted to finance, and so we after the coffee shop, we started what we called Grandma's Wealth Wisdom. That was our business. And the tagline was sometimes intelligence skips a generation, which is true. People were savers versus spenders and not putting everything on black in the casino of Wall Street. And so we were like, oh, yeah, that's powerful. And it was kind of like with that business podcast. You ever watched Big Bang Theory?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So Howard's mom, you never see her, but she's always there,
Yeah.
right? That was kind of like Grandma's Wealth Wisdom. Was that idea? But then we were like, hey, we are really good at what we do. We are smart, and so we rebranded and have Wealth Wisdom Financial podcast. We primarily educate. The hardest part in podcasting and why now we've moved it. We do a lot of my wife and I sharing, talking about thinking, and we don't give all the answers. We're not just a "you're stupid" financial show that some people listen to.
Yeah.
Not going to say anything.
No, I already know what you're talking about.
But we want to be a place of bringing people up and lifting people up and helping them think. Now that makes it hard because in the world of clickbait, people love train wrecks and love I don't know how to say this. Crapping on other people, or saying, and people love that stuff, and I think that's sad about our culture. I'm not going to go there, so maybe our viewers are lower, or all this is not as big. But I want to build a podcast that I would feel good about,
Right.
Producing and listening to, and that my son isn't going to get years down the line saying, man, those guys were jerks.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's kind of us. My wife and I do it. She's a CFP, certified financial planner. We do a lot in the infinite banking space within ours, and then profit first. So we talk a lot about building a financial foundation and thinking. And so we've been doing this for years. And I do believe the backbone of our economy is small business. So
Excellent.
that's why we do it. We love it. And my wife, this is something I will tell every person that's listening, is know who you are, right? Know kind of what you want. And I done there's a guy named Perry Marshall, and he has a marketing DNA test. Your marketing DNA. So for us, we are writers, right? Written form is good. So we do a lot of that. I love live content, like doing this kind of thing. Whereas my wife is more scripted. And so if you listen to that and you see, I can't stay on track, she's like, here it is. It gets hard because I like video, or I'm not video, but conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas that one is kind of us sharing what we know,
Good.
so it's kind of fun, but also challenging because we're different people.
Any other things for people thinking of podcasting with their partner and navigating a relationship and as a podcaster and as a spouse? Is there any other words of wisdom you could give someone listening?
Kind of know your goals, right? And be consistent. So we trying to batch our podcast, or try to. She's the writer. I'm there for colorful commentary. And so it's fun, but we also are very knowing where our strengths are and weaknesses. Sometimes she'll do solo episodes. Usually they get more views than when I'm on, I guess, because I'm not as hot looking or something. I don't know. And so it's interesting, but also in the end, with what we do with our podcast is I want to educate. I want to help people think for themselves. So it's not a lead generator so much as a helping people that come through the pipeline. They then say, "Oh, this is really powerful. I really like that," and they listen to old episodes. They tell me stories. I'm like, I don't remember even saying that. Yeah. Which is, but it's fun.
It's good. For the listeners to come to your show, who's your target audience? Who are you really trying to speak to? Kind of give us that kind of sense too.
Yeah, I think that's a lot now is business owners, entrepreneurs, people that want to they don't want to just give up their financials just to Charles Schwab or somebody else. They want to actually have control of their own finances. We will educate them on cash flow and those kind of things. But I believe it's for, everybody. Everybody should take the seat of control of their own financial future. And so I would say everybody, but I like to focus on business owners because then, being a business owner, you're thinking about cash flow. You can't just have for example, a podcast. It's a time suck sometimes, but if helping it become a sustainable business, that's a thing I like to think about. Right?
Yeah. And the idea too that you can turn your podcast into something that can help you financially, which is great. Like even if it's just, occasional payments you can put on your mortgage or a car payment here and there, having that opportunity to make some money with your show is always great. That's a frequent question. How do I grow my audience and how do I make money from this? That's what I hear a lot in podcasting from new podcasters. So any words of advice that you have around maybe making some money with your podcast, if that's your intent? And is there a way to start, a good way to start doing that from the beginning?
I think, again, don't just go in it to make money. Go in it because this is what you want to do. Because if you're going to try and make money through podcasting, well, you're going in the wrong direction in the first place. And so do it because you want to do it. Like that's where my wife again and us, we are in the Enneagram, knowing yourself. She's a 5, so she takes in information, and the way to be redemptive is to put it out in the world, right? And so disseminating it, putting it down into a 6th grade reading level that everybody can understand, very hard to do. Um, and so then we then do that exercise, and then some people find it. Now, am I monetized on YouTube? No, I can't figure that out to save my life. Um, right? Some people do. I don't know how. Maybe it's all chatbots in Russia or something. I don't know. I'm not gonna go down that road. Um, but I've had clients who have listened to the podcast and then ended up doing a $800,000 annuity premium because of hearing our show. That was a big, big amount, right? Then you've had other people that, they then say, "Oh, this really helped me," and so it is positive. And again, I make money from it. It's good. That's not my end goal. It's help more people, and then the money will flow, whether it's through other things, people joining my YouTube or email list, those kind of things.
Yeah. Anytime you can have like a service or like coaching, like you guys do, anything you can tie it back to your business, a podcast just makes sense to get your voice out there. People get to know you. People get to build a relationship with you, even though it's a little one-sided. They're building from a listener to you. You don't know them in particular, but they know you. And then they reach out to you. They're like, Brandon, I love what you do on your show. I've been listening to the last 35 episodes. I'm ready to work with you. I want to, I need your help. And like that could be better than a billboard on a bus. That could be better than a park bench, with your face on it. This is somebody connecting with you in real time, and there's a relationship built over time. Because again, to your point, being consistent and being in their world on a regular basis, they just you're a piece accompaniment for them. They just a companion to them, and they just build that relationship over time. So anytime you can build it around your business, your podcast, that's super smart.
Well, and then using it around your business, like a lot of times people are like, I'm just going to build a podcast and then that's going to solve everything. Right. And sometimes, and I would tell a client if they're going to start or people, what are the 12 things, right? One of my friends runs the podcast factory. And so we were working with him and he said, what are your 12 anchor episodes, right? So then having at least a little bit, and it might not be a podcast that you're going to do for 20 years. I don't know. Maybe you are, but maybe it's a series. And creating a series that then you can add to your email autoresponders that then educate the clients. That's older episodes that you forgot, but it's educating them. And then it just flows from there. So I think that's one way of thinking about it and using, like even for our book, we have 12 episodes that we did, and we have landing page on those chapters.
Smart idea. That's a great idea, Brandon. I like that a lot. So podcasting wise, what are you excited about as a podcaster as you look towards the future of podcasting and all the things that are coming our way in this space? Is there anything that's catching your eye and you're like, I'm really curious about this part of podcasting?
Yeah. One, I think that's a little interesting is I don't know, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Is it everybody's now a podcaster, right? And you hear I don't know, people that are actors and saying, "Hey, I have my podcast," and you're like, "Oh, he has a podcast too. Everybody has a podcast." And so I feel like there's a challenge of in order to be successful, you all have to have a podcast, right? And you're not you haven't arrived yet until you have one. And I wonder if that's sometimes people shouldn't be knowing who you are. Maybe you're a writer, not a speaker, right? And so I'm curious to know where your thinking is on uh, a lot of people now who are, I'm a life coach now, I'm going to be a podcaster, and everybody's going to listen, and they think it's going to be sunshine and rainbows.
Hmm.
Uh, have you seen an influx? And do you also see, just as many, I know I've seen some of the stats, a lot of dead shows.
Right.
They started for 5 episodes. They were like, "Oh, this is going to be amazing." I put out 3, and then they lost the fizzle.
Right.
Do you see that a
Yeah,
lot?
and like we connected through Podmatch, and Alex Sanfilippo and his team, he does like a stats update on a regular basis on how many active podcasts there are and all that. He's got some great information on Podmatch. It's free. You can see it anytime. But yeah, I see a lot of people coming to podcasts because it's a very low entry to like the barrier to get in is really easy. You know, you can do it from your phone, you can do all these things, and it's so simple, anybody can start. But to continue podcasting, I think that's where people are like, you mean I got to do another episode? Yeah. You got to do another one and then another one and then another one. And they're like, I don't have time for this. Like, and I think the one thing from a business perspective, I find that people who come into podcasting, they're a coach or they have a business around their podcast, they're a lawyer or whatever, they think they can do it all themselves, but they've never done anything like this before. And then they realize how much happens behind the scenes. They don't really see that as a viewer or a listener of podcasts until you get in it. You're like, oh, I got to do all of these things every week. Well, I can't do that. Like, I'm a real estate agent. I got to go show houses. I can't be in my office recording or editing. I can't do any of that stuff. So maybe in that situation, when you have the finances through business, is to hire somebody to take care of some of that
Yeah.
stuff that you don't have time to do. So you could focus on your clients. I'm sure, Brandon, if you have a choice between working with a client or editing a podcast episode, by default, my impression is you're going to want to work with a client and help them in their financial journey more than editing an and an ah out of a podcast. So I think there's a lack of planning and a lack of understanding how much happens behind the scenes. And in that, if that's the case and you have the finances to do so, hiring somebody to take that off your plate so that you can focus on what you do, I think is a great idea. An example I would say for people that maybe don't have a business, if you hate grocery shopping and it takes you an hour every week to go grocery shopping, and in that hour you could be doing something else that makes you more money or helps you with whatever, or your relationships, your kids, whatever, would you not replace that 1 hour and let somebody do the shopping for you if it was very easy and not a lot of money to have somebody do that, so that you could just be at home with your kids or doing something else and your food just shows up? Like, like there is opportunities to create space by leveraging people who can help you do things that you're not good at or you don't have time for. And I think that's where some people get stuck, and that's where people leave podcasting is they think they can do it all until the realization that they can't, and then you just stop. So plan.
Well, and I do think there's a. Have you ever read the book Who Not How
No, I'm writing
by
it down right now. Who, not how?
Dan Sullivan
Okay.
and Hardy? Who Not How. His 10x is easier than 2x. I recommend that all to everybody. So in business, we and as growing a team, I want to create an agency that I'm going out and doing all kinds of things. I even think of all the CEOs out there, Alex Hormozy and all of um, what do? They're the spokesperson for the business. They're not doing everything. And people are like, I want to be like him. I'm like, well, he doesn't do everything. All he does is hit record and sends it to somebody else. And then somebody knows analytics like crazy and they do all this. And I'm like, I can't even figure that out. I don't even know. Um, but it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of what you do actually matters, 80% doesn't. Even on podcasts, you look at your stats and you're like, oh, how to save money. That's what got a lot for us. I'm like, really? No one actually wants to know how to actually build a financial foundation or taxes. They want the cheat codes, and which is hard because there is no cheat codes personally. Um, However, if you have a good foundation financially, then I can make sure that the budget, and if it's a personal hobby, that's okay. It's a hobby if you like it. And again, sometimes I'm like telling people, is it a business or a hobby? If it's a hobby, treat it like a hobby. If it's a business, treat it like a business. And as a business grows, you're going to get things off of your plate so you can do more of what you love. And so I don't know how to edit a podcast in general. I know how to do the YouTube stuff some, um, but having the who behind
Right.
it, I have somebody through a virtual assistant that helps do all that
Good.
stuff. Right. And so I feel like a lot of times people think, oh, they see the end product and they see Alex Hormozy and say, well, I could do that. It's going to be amazing. I'm like, I've done all the things he's done. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's just luck,
Yeah.
right? And who you, but it has to be a passion of why you do it.
Right.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'm in life insurance. I swear I would have picked something else to sell and do, but it's changed my life, and that's why we're doing a financial podcast. Now, I could do something more fun, right? Or video games. I don't know. I have a 6-year-old. I could court him and make probably a lot more money.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because he's pretty cute. I think he could give views. But
Yeah.
it is crazy.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I'm going to start a podcast because I have a business and I have time, something's going to happen. You're going to get popular. Your business is going to grow. You're going to get more clients, and you're not going to have time. So be realistic from the beginning. If you like, to Brandon's point, if you're going to create a podcast and it's going to become part of your business or be your business, then think of it like a business and treat it like a business. Set it up the proper way. Set it up legally. Do all the right things. Do everything the right way from the beginning. That's your intent. If you're going to do a hobby podcast and your intent's to not make money with the show, maybe someone will randomly give you some money for as a listener. That's great. That's kind. You can buy flowers for your wife with that. Great. But if you need to I would say at the beginning of deciding whether or not you want to be a podcaster as a life coach or whatever you are, to understand, is this a hobby or a business, Brandon? That's a great point. And I think you need to plan from that point. You can always change. It might be a little harder down the road to change from one to the other, but start from the beginning and have a clear intent. Is this a hobby? Is it a business? And then set it up the right way. I think that's really smart, Brandon.
Well, and then I'm a big believer in profit first. Profit first. There's a guy named Mike Mikowicz that wrote the book on that. And so for if it's a business or even personal, they have this thing called the envelope system that the man we won't name kind of said that and which is some of that's good. Like put money aside that is for this thing. So with profit first, they say real revenue comes in, and then you have owners pay, right? How much I make, taxes, OpEx, right, and profit, right? And so you have those accounts, and you separate it, and then you build a business around that, right? So I make sure I get paid, and then as my OpEx, and I want to have that controlled, certain percentages. Well, that tells me, oh, I have enough in the budget to have a VA that can help me do all my editing, right? Or staff or whatever. And doing more again of what I love, speaking on these kind of things versus editing or doing the things, email writing, all those things that are maybe causing the drag, right? But you have to know your numbers and the analytics behind it. I know my stats on my podcast going back way to when podcast was invented. I feel like 2017 was when we started, so we got all the stats. It's sometimes fun to look at. Sometimes you're like, wow, how come I'm not Joe Rogan
Right.
yet?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
hey, it'll be soon. It'll be soon. I like it. Yeah. And knowing your numbers is super important. I think when you're starting out, don't be fixated on your numbers. It's like growing a garden in your backyard. You plant the seed, you don't just stand there and stare at the dirt. Well, nothing's happened. Well, you just planted it 3 seconds ago. You got to give it some time, right? So eventually your audience is going to grow. So instead of staring at that seed planted in the ground, give it some time. Go focus on your content. Go focus on becoming better as a podcaster, and then go back out and check. You might see some things, little sprouts sticking out through the ground. Hey, it's working. If this thing is happening, people are listening. That's I think that a lot of people get caught up in the numbers right from the beginning. Another reason why I think some people leave podcasting, they don't see an immediate return on their investment of their time and their resources. They're like, listen, I've got 5 episodes, Brendan. I haven't made $100,000 yet, so I'm out. Right? You're like, well,
yep.
wait a minute, right? There's a path that we're all on, and we're all at different stages, right?
Well, and even the one that the guy that ended up becoming a client, and then his brother's the client, and some other things actually going through right now. I looked at my stats and I'm like, wait, we had like not very many downloads, 100 downloads or something and I'm like, okay, 100 downloads. Well, he's the one that listened to the episode, and then he did a big amount,
Yeah,
right, over time,
yeah,
right? But I'm like, I could say, well, there's only 100, not 100,000 listening to my show. But you have to also think about, if we are public speakers. Think about
hmm
this. You're in a room and 100 people are listening to you share about what you're passionate about
yeah,
in a room.
right,
100 people, right? We pay to be in a room like that, right? And, and we'll pay a lot of money to speak to 100 or 600 people. However, like 100 to 600 people listening to you on a weekly basis,
right,
and we say, well, that's not that many people. I'm like, that's a pretty big event
right.
if you think, right? But we kind of go into the perspective of, oh, well, no one's there, or this or that.
Yeah, we get fixated on the empty seats, or there's somebody not
Yeah.
sitting there, and we're like, oh man, I wish the room was full. You know, I don't want to let down my audience. I don't want to be let down as a host, and I just have this expectation of this magic number I need to hit. But the one thing I noticed, Brandon, if you say I want 100,000 listeners, the moment you hit it, you want 200,000, and then you want 300,000. Like it's like a dog chasing its tail. You just never get to a place of satisfaction because you're always chasing the number. But imagine even 10 people who follow your plan, who work with you, who listen to your show, who hire you, is worth more to you as a host than 100,000 people who you never hear from, who
Yeah.
never interact with you, and you think they're listening, but are they really retaining it? Right? I love a small group of people bought in community, who love what you do and support you. That
Yeah.
means more to me than a big fancy number, really.
Well, that's with our website, our community, our podcast. People are coming in and they're learning, and they listen. Like, I have one of my clients who has his own podcast, right? And he'll message me saying, "Your podcast is late. It didn't come out at this time." And you're like, "Well, that's because it's a holiday, and we're going to release it tomorrow, or tomorrow." Um, but they're waiting and watching and listening, and I have some of those friends, and the consistency. I'm a learner, so I've listened to Pat
Oh
Flynn
yeah,
and these kind of things, and you have to think, man, he didn't start there. He joined in the YouTube thing as things were changing, and so I have another person that I know, and this is a hard thing of comparing to other people. They do what we do in the infinite banking space, but they jumped on TikTok and did something uh, that really helped amplify. Right? I'm not a TikToker as well. I have a channel, and we do our shorts and all that stuff from our from our podcast into to those channels. I don't actually. I'm more of a creator, not a consumer in that regard. But being aware of what's happening, right? And he was able, right place, right time. Pat Flynn, right place, right time, and consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So being consistent has a lot more to do than just saying, I'm going to, it didn't work for 12 episodes or a year or 6 years or 10 years, maybe. I don't know. But also knowing when to say, is this bringing me joy? Now, in you don't want to just say, all right, it's not all joyful, right? You have to balance that with, I still got to work. Uh, and with when we sold our coffee shop, we had a 5-year window of saying, I'm going to put 5 years into this every week, every day. And then if it's not where I want it to be in 5 years, I can walk away from
Right.
it. But you have to commit
Yeah.
and say, I'm going to put everything on the table for this.
I love it.
I think that's what's happening with podcasting is, oh, I'm going to do this. Everybody's going to listen and I'm going to be the next Joe Rogan. And you're like, oh, that didn't work. And you're like, well, no, because you didn't even promote it. And the hardest part for me isn't about creation. That's easy. Doing a podcast and editing a podcast is easy. It's the marketing of the podcast that I would say is the hardest thing to do. And if you ever figure that out, let me know. But it is like the hardest to get people to say, oh, I really want to listen to you talk about savings versus investing. And that's sometimes hard to, and then 140 characters or
Yeah,
less,
yeah,
or, all that.
exactly. Right. Yeah, it's hard to break through the noise, and there's so many other things people can be distracted by in their search to find you. So anything you can do to help is great. Brendan, so new person coming to your show, first time listener. I like to always do this to help a new listener for your podcast. Is there an episode in particular, a starting point where you would suggest a new listener comes? Start at the most recent episode, start at the beginning. Where should we go as a new listener?
So I would say go to our YouTube channel, right? Because we have all the thumbnails, or go to the podcast and scroll. Look at the titles because we make titles specific, and then listen to that one, the one that gets you. Maybe listen to the most recent one, but it might not be relevant, right? And so there's some, or you could be like the crazy people that download everything and start from the bottom and work your way up. Um, that's always fun. It's good for my downloads when you do that. But then you'll also see the evolution, right? So I like to with some podcasts, I might listen to their newest and oldest because you'll see them even change. Right. But I do think listening and if you're a business owner, the profit first ones are amazing. We try and build them in playlists. If you're interested in the infinite banking space, there's a lot that we put into that thinking. And in what I'm doing in our podcast, Wealth Wisdom Financial, is again, I want people to be thinkers, participants in their own financial journey, in their own business. Don't just hire a CFO or a marketing person, actually know how to read a P&L statement and know some of the marketing metrics, right? That's important. Same with your life. And I think that be the master, don't just consume content, think through the content. I think that's a challenge in our world now. If you just consume and parrot, what that the guy
Yeah,
mentioned
exactly.
does, or other people. I mean, we're in a very divisive world now, and we'll just copy whatever is the next meme. And I like to think about our economy. Why are eggs so high right now? Well, there's a lot more that happened, and we can't just blame the president or the past president or in general. How even for inflation, when we talk about that, which we have, well, what did we do 4 years ago in both countries, yours and ours? 4 years ago, everything stopped. We gave out money, a lot of it. And then we were like, hey, free checks, I'll take it. Not thinking, and I was like, this is going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing podcast on it. You can go back into our episode saying, this is going to be, inflation is coming. And then it did. And then they're like, oh man, this is, but being able to be a thinker of economics, I think everybody should kind of understand. And so I think we need to be educated and learning. And so that's kind of what ours is that. So that's fun, hard. But in the end, I want everyone, hey, don't just hand it to you to do or somebody else. Actually know the numbers behind it.
Excellent. We'll have links to the Wealth Wisdom Financial Podcast in the show notes. We'll have links to the books as well, Brandon, that you mentioned. I love a good book recommendation. That makes me very, very happy. So thank you for those. And again, we're going to have you come back on Living the Next Chapter and talk more about your book in more detail and get a little bit more into the financial side and help people. So if you're listening to this and you're like, Dave, I need more Brandon. Well, head over to Living the Next Chapter. He'll be back and we're going to talk about that as well. I'm super excited to have him back for that. Brandon, thank you so much for sharing your podcast journey. And I'd love to stay in touch and maybe have you back in the future as an update. I'd love to keep following your path as a podcaster and all the great things you do to help people with their finances. Thank you so much, Brandon, for making time for this.
Thanks, David. And thanks for helping people learn how to podcast. And my last thing for listeners is just start, but then don't just say, I'm going to start. Keep going. Excellent.
Great advice, everyone. Brandon is now the new host of the How to Podcast series, just with that. So, Brandon, thank you so much for doing this. It's great to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcasts with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review, do the follow, go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast because you're going there and you're staying to the end. It's probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.